Well, good evening and welcome to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host for this program. Once again, EWTN gives me this great privilege to sit with you and hear a story of conversion. And I'm really excited about our guest tonight. We share some things in common, though I almost shunned to mention him because he's a real football player. I was just an imitation back in college, but we also share Cleveland together, so there's a lot of things that are neat. Look forward to hearing his story. Elvis Grbac. Elvis, it is great to have you here on the program.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for having me.
It really is. And I'm excited to hear a number of, not only your story, but also some of the things that you share at men's conferences,
right,
which is so important today. I was just recently talking with somebody that said that when he stands in line for confession, more often than not, he's one of the few men that are there.
Wow.
And he's talking about the importance of that, and he thought maybe you would talk about that because that had such a big part to play in your continuing journey. So,
absolutely.
So let me back away and invite you. Let's take us all the way back and hear about your journey.
Okay. I have to start with my parents. So my parents came to this country in 1968. I have an older brother and
recent. Wow.
Yeah. So I have an older brother and an older sister that were born in Croatia. I'm 100% Croatian. And so Roman Catholic Catholicism was very, very strong, unbelievable foundation in our family. And then I have a younger sister also. So the two of us were born here in the States. A Croatian parish? St. Paul's in Cleveland.
Okay.
And my parents are still part of that. And they've been in the choir. They've been singing there since 1970. So it's been a long time. So I'm very proud of my parents for giving me that foundation. And when I talk to men's conferences, I talk about faith, family, and work life and what I did as a football player. And I try to integrate that for the men so they can understand that they can do all three at the same time. And what happens a lot of times is that faith aspect becomes the last part of it, and work kind of really takes over. Very blessed as a young man growing up. There are a couple things that have kind of happened to me in my journey that I think hopefully I can kind of come back to and talk about. Obviously, athletics was a big part of what I did. I went to St. Joseph High School, which is Villa Angela St. Joseph's High School now. I'm going to back up just a little bit, though. I mean, in your faith formation in that church that your parents came a part of, were you active as a young man? If you look back, did faith, did the seed, or is that what you want to talk about later? Yeah, okay, let's talk. Well, I will say this. I was a practicing Catholic. Okay, that's what I was. Yeah. Compared to what I am now, and having a true relationship with Christ, really in love with Jesus Christ, and having a true encounter with him. So let's go back when I was 10 years old, and I share this with a lot of the men's conferences. So I had an opportunity when I was Easter Sunday morning as a 10-year-old kid living in Willoughby Hills, Ohio. I got ready early in the morning and lay down on my bed, closed my door in my room, and the crucifix I pulled off the wall, and I sat there for about 20, 30 minutes contemplating on the cross and really understood what Christ had done for me as a 10-year-old kid, to the point where I reflected as an adult with my spiritual director saying that I became very emotional, crying, weeping, and really understanding, and then reflecting on that and understanding that I think God works in such mysterious ways that I think he knew my path and planted something within me that would bear fruit later. And I think the journey of being in athletics, it's a fantastic journey to be a part of, but there are pulls and struggles with it.
Yeah, there's a scripture I've mentioned on the program many times, 2 Corinthians, where it talks about we're comforted that we might comfort. And now he's looking at just what you said, that there are things that God has us go through that prepare us specifically to have a witness later.
I'm living that. Yeah. I'm actually, that's my entire life. So being from St. Joe's and then going on to Michigan and then playing professional football.
Played at Michigan?
I did. I am a Michigan grad. I'm proud of it. I got to play for Bo Schembechler for 2 years.
Did you really?
So, yes. Yeah. Very.
Whoa.
If I looked through my career, I was very blessed with men of faith and men of leadership. at every turn. Starting at the home life and then continuing on, really looking back and seeing some of the people that were part of my life and being successful, those people really helped me along the way. I'm truly blessed.
When our great nation was established, a number of the founding fathers, including John Adams, particularly said that a democracy cannot work unless the people are religious and moral. He talked about that. And I'm wondering if it's true of a football team.
Oh, I absolutely. True, yeah. Okay, so let me give you this example, because when I got to 49ers, Mr. DeBartolo was the owner at that time. And he gave us an opportunity on every Sunday morning, depending on if we were on the road or at home, to be able to go to church before the game. I don't think there was any other organization that was doing that in the league at that time. So I was able to continue my faith journey through that. Now, I will be honest, okay, through those years of playing in college and in the professional ranks, where my faith was very tested. And I will say this, when I tell the men's conferences, is that professional life really took over. Yeah. And that's what really happens at that level, is you get to the point where that becomes such a focal point of your life that faith really does get put to the side. And that's where I was through my playing career. When I was done, I was lost. I was truly lost. But
I think about at the end of the first letter to John, I think you relate to this.
Yes,
You might know where I'm going.
I have a good sneaky feeling.
Because most of the letters in the New Testament end with some kind of, hey, it's been Paul, it's good to see you, blah, 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 say hello to Fred, whatever it is. John doesn't end it. He ends it with one statement. Little children, keep yourself from idols.
Right. I wish I would have brought my Super Bowl ring, because I could lay it right here on the table and say, here's the golden cap right here. And how many guys did I talk to that they put that as the ultimate goal? And I sit there, and a lot of times when I do men's conferences, I'm in churches and there's the crucifix behind me, and I put the ring there and I say, look at the difference. Look at the difference. This is man-made. This is God-given. There's a big difference there. And try to teach those men that.
Was part of it also, I'm assuming, going way back to a discovery of athletic abilities when you're a young man, through high school, through the state up north, and then the acclaim that you get.
Yes.
Because of these skills.
Yes, and that comes with it. And how do you handle that? How do you handle, as a mature athlete, sometimes men aren't mature in that. And so that becomes really, like I said, I was not mature through that process. And I look back at that, and that was really just my choice, was that to live that type of life as a professional athlete. But at the same time, you gotta remember, I was married through all that process too, and raising children. So I was really getting pulled from every situation, until the point where really later on in my career and my professional life, I really call it almost like the dark years a little bit, because my faith was really hidden. I was very blinded, to the point where when I was done and retired, I kind of tell this to the men's group, if it felt like if you have a faucet of water just constantly running, and then someone coming, turning it off and throwing the knob out, and it was completely over. And I was totally lost in my faith and what I was going to do in the next part of my life. Thank God for my wife, my high school sweetheart. So
we're going to get there. I had our guest is Elvis Grbac. Another thing that are men of faith, women of faith, but who are successful, that sometimes in that faith, they can convince themselves that all this success, of course, is a sign of God's pleasure, of God's approval. So in other words, you can justify all of the stuff and even the ambition and the ego, well, this is what God's given me.
This is a God-given talent. This is a God-given gift to me. And that's what really happens is you become the focal point, and not understanding that God's providence and God really sustaining us through that. There's the lost part of it, is that, we believe that God sustains us through everything from the moment of conception all the way to the moment of death. And then when you understand that you do have an unbelievable talent, it becomes all about you. It becomes very self-centered and individualized. And that's really what can happen, especially at that professional level.
Were you active at all in the sacraments during all those years?
I was. I will say this, the Eucharist is my life. It is my life. My parents are daily Mass goers. And after I was retired, really coming back to the faith, that's where my focal point was. I literally walking into church, I remember starting to go to Mass like my parents. And from the first time I entered the Mass and received, I knew this is where I should be. I just knew it. And I think because of that seed being planted in me, that I was on the right path.
So when you retired, you felt though that the water was off and the spigot was gone.
Mm-hmm.
How long did that last? Explain your feeling during that time, if you will, but also, was that God preparing you?
I think both. I think I had a great opportunity, and I will say this, from 2001 to about 2010 was really a time on my own to really kind of figure out what I was doing with my life. Thank God for my wife, and thank God for my children. At that time, now you have to understand, my oldest son, Jack, was born with spina bifida occulta. So when I was in San Francisco, my second year in the league, he was born. And if you know anything about spina bifida, when the child is born, there's an actual hole at the base of the spine. And the fluid from the spinal cord is discharged in birth. He had a fat tissue, so it was closed. But after we took an MRI, there was a type of like an umbilical cord that was running up into his spinal cord. And all the nerves were coming off his base of his spine and it was intertwined in that. Now, God works in mysterious ways. The #1 pediatric neurosurgeon in the world is in San Francisco, and he's Catholic. So go figure. And if you saw Jack right now, you would think nothing of it. I mean, he just looks like a normal kid and everything. He still has struggles, even at this age, at 24 years old. But through that time, we had an unbelievable time to spend time with him and my other 2 kids that, bless my father, when I woke up in the morning, he was gone at 6 o'clock in the morning, didn't get home till like 10 o'clock at night, putting 4 kids through Catholic education in college. I wanted to be around my children as much as possible, coaching them everything from basketball to football to baseball, all that. My dad never had that opportunity with me. So I did that for a number of years because I wanted the kids to really kind of understand who I was. And in that time, God gave me the time to really develop the way he envisioned my creation. And so my wife was a solid rock through all that. I'm very, very appreciative.
Was she a lifelong Catholic?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, she's Italian-Irish. Okay. So a good combination there, strong woman. And I always say this to the men's group is that, my high school sweetheart, I think through that whole process, I think God's work was in that also, is that putting her in my life through those dark times, she was constantly on my side through all that. And even to the point when I was retired and spending time with my family and my kids.
I'm also wondering and I'm looking at that dark time that you're talking about. Well, that's like 9 years or so, right?
Yeah.
9 years. Retirement can be tough on guys, especially when you've been, you're in the public and you've been successful and you got a ring and you got all this stuff. And then from that side, maybe retirement looks, I'm going to kick back and relax. But after retirement, it can be really tough.
It's very tough. It's very tough in the point that in my spiritual development at that time, and I talked to my spiritual director about this, I was trying to get rid of that person, trying to put that person to bed and be done with it. And my spiritual director said, absolutely not. You have to bring that person. That is you. That is part of you. You need to bring that along so that what you can do when you speak to these men and all your ministry after that, you can reflect on that and bring that into light for other men. It's a great opportunity for me to go out and speak my faith and intertwine their work life with their family and their faith aspect, and have that experience and understand that guys might be in that similar position, and to be able to understand that that is a part of the process, and then to understand if really Christ is truly the center of your life, then even through those dark times, he will always be there with you. And so I had that opportunity to do that. I will say this though. So 2013 came around, and I was at a parish mission in Solon, Ohio at St. Rita's Parish, and Father Larry Richards came and spoke, and it was the second night, and typically his second night is on reconciliation. And I walked in there with my wife and a couple other friends, and what they do is they hand you a sheet of paper when you walk in, and it's every sin that you could ever commit on front and back of that sheet of paper. And I sat down and I looked at that sheet, and I was sweating bullets, because I looked at the sheet and I could say check, check, check all the way down. I mean, I was that kind of guy. Father Larry Richards spoke for about 3 hours, and he absolutely beat me up and kicked me in my gut. And it was at that time in my life, that's exactly what I needed. I needed someone to say, wake up, okay? Yeah. Wake up to your faith. Here it is. It's a gift given to you. You need to be open to it. And that night I went to reconciliation. And it was in one of the back rooms, big church, holds about 3,000, 4,000 people. And they have some back rooms back there. I went back there, and each corner there was a priest, and my pastor was there, who is actually the bishop up in Grand Rapids, Michigan now, Bishop Grbac. And I went to him, and I sat down, and it was probably the first time I've gone to confession in a number of years. And it's not like there's a partition there, or you're in a little room by yourself. Right behind me, there's a line of 20 people, maybe 5-6 feet from me. And I am bawling my eyes out, confess. And I got up from that moment, and I said, never again. Absolutely not. And I walked out of there, and I went through a process, I think, truly, in the spiritual life, we can talk about the purgative stage, the illuminative stage, and the unitive stage. I really went through from 2013 to 2014, I call it like a purgative stage, where yes, I was on fire for the love of Christ through the Holy Spirit, but at the same time, I really had an opportunity to reflect on my life and what I had done in the past and where I wanted to go, to the point where I was able to call friends that I hadn't talked to in 10, 15 years and truly ask for forgiveness, and had an opportunity to really say to them that I was wrong. I didn't love you as Christ loves me. And I'm asking for forgiveness. And on the other line, it was amazing. People were, wow, I can't believe that you're calling me. I'm thinking the same thing. It was just one of those. I encourage men, women, anybody, grandparents, parents, children, say it. Be a part of that, your vocabulary of forgiveness. People are seeking that on a consistent basis. In that time also, my relationship with his mother grew immensely. I started there. I don't know why. I started there.
Well, hold that, because I want to, before I forget something, because it goes into it. As a speaker, though I'm not speaking as much as I used to, you realize that as good as Father Larry can be, and as good as that 3-hour thing might have been, he realizes not every guy in that place is going to get zapped. In fact, maybe the most important thing that happened that night was not so much what Father was saying, but for some reason in God's timing and his grace, you were open.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. So let me just backtrack a minute there. So the day before that, or I think it was that afternoon. If you remember, March 13th, 2013, or March 14th, is the day that Pope Francis was elected Pope. So I was sitting in a gym working out 13 years later. I'm still working out, and Pope Francis comes up on the screen, and I still remember him saying, "Pray for me." And I looked around and I'm like, what am I doing? This is not my calling. And I literally got up from the gym and I totally left. And that night I went, and yes, was God there? Yes, absolutely. Even in those dark times, I realized that God was there also. But it was me that was blinded, me that had the blinders on. The darkness was myself. The inner darkness that they talk about is that the light of Christ was not shining within me. There was a total darkness there. And like he planted that seed in me when I was 10 years old, he knew exactly when it was going to start bearing fruit. And the opportune time was at that moment.
So I think about especially Catholics at home, for example, whose children and siblings have left the church and you really want them. How do we get them back? How do we break that barrier? Now, we'll talk about that in the second half of the program. Okay. But what I'm thinking about is one thing we want to be praying for people is that God would, in His grace, open their hearts and minds. Now, we also need to pray that because the freedom of their will respond to that.
Yes.
It's not a puppet thing.
Right.
So God gave you the grace, but you still had the freedom to respond.
You have a choice. You have that choice, and I really truly believe each individual person has that choice. There comes a point in your life. Yes, did I grow up Catholic in a great family, Catholic education all the way through, but there comes a point in your life that you have to come, as an individual, have to come and make this decision. Do I open up myself to God and truly believe that that is His Son truly risen for me? You have to answer that question yourself individually. You have to come to that point.
Which we hope is what confirmation would do for our young people. It doesn't always happen, obviously.
Right.
We forget that that's what it's about.
Right. But
it's confirming.
But also, too, I think it's imperative that parents talk about that and have an opportunity to sit down with your kids and say, okay, this is fine what you're doing at school, but what are we doing at home, and what is your vocational call? Are you listening to God's call? I think that's where we're missing the boat, is that at home, are we really sitting down with our kids and talking about their vocation? Is it the religious life? Is it the married life? Is it something beyond that? We're not asking those questions at home. I think that's where we're kind of missing the boat.
Yeah, and the last thing in the world I'd want to imply any fault with your parents on whether, so I don't want to go there. I want to apply that. But my only, what about the necessity of when you have a young man with these great skills, of always reminding them, this came from him.
Right.
So that the gratitude always grows alongside the skill itself.
Right. Now, come to my defense of my parents. Okay, coming from the old country, they only learned it one way. Okay, so they're limited, okay, and how they can reflect on that and really try to, their way of showing their love and respect for their family, their children, and God is in the way they act. Not so much in their words, but in their actions and what they do. Yeah. You sit there, I can look at my father and my mother, and through the entire process of being a professional athlete and going through all that, my parents were always there for me, always. So their actions were speaking more than their words. Now I have an opportunity to do the action and the wording. Yeah. So hopefully now my children understand that they can continue to do the same that I do.
Yeah. I mean, even if a young man or young woman have great skills in math, so that eventually it might be a great entrepreneur, philanthropist, well, if they could learn from the earliest days that ability in math is a gift of God. Right. So that gratitude is always the foundation for how they develop that. Right. Then they will be a philanthropist and not just centered on that ring that they get.
Exactly.
So you've come back through confession, you were talking about how Our Lady became very important to you in the process. I'm sure seeds were planted about Our Lady when you were a little boy, right?
I somewhere along the way, and I would probably have to hang that on my mother. My mother was just that loving mother that, and love comes in a lot of different forms. It may not come as very warm sometimes, but like I said, her actions speak for more than words. But it was interesting. So I was going through that whole period of that purgation, and I started with her for some reason. I don't know why. And she led me right to her son. And I just knew that in the back of my mind. Who knows the son better than the mother? And from that point on, she's always been a part of my life. She's always been kind of a process of my day, even to the point where when I wake up in the morning, even before I put my feet on the ground, I say a prayer to her to start my day so that she can lead me to her son during this day. I start every day with her and then continue on from there. So 2014 came around, and very interesting how God works in mysterious ways. So my daughter's a very good athlete. She got all the athletic genes. She's an outside hitter for Northwestern. She's on the women's volleyball team there. We traveled a lot for volleyball. So in 2014, Easter weekend, we were actually in Washington, D.C. playing for the weekend. And Good Friday, went to services, and I sat there after Mass, and for some reason, they left the crucifix right up there on the top step. And everybody had cleared out. And I sat there for 20, 30 minutes, like I was like that 10-year-old kid, contemplating on the cross and truly understanding what Christ had done to me, coming full circle through the cross and realizing that he was there present through the entire process. And from that point on, I haven't looked back. I mean, there's an everyday process for me that continues to understand dying to oneself in all aspects of life, not only family life, work life, my spiritual life, and continuing on there. It's an unbelievable journey that I am on.
There's a mysterious verse in Galatians. I never saw it as a Protestant. I never thought about it because, and to this day, it's kind of a mysterious verse. But it says, "Oh, foolish Galatians," because they were being distracted and all these other things.
Right.
And he says, "Who bewitched you? Before whose eyes Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified." Now, is Paul talking about a crucifix? What's he talking about? Or is he talking about the priest who's the altar Christus? But he's kind of talking about when you experience the meaning of the crucifix, how can you be so bewitched and leave?
It answers everything. It answers everything. And that's the message I try to convey, especially at the men's conference. I'm very blessed. Many of the times there's always a crucifix behind me when I'm giving a talk. And I focus on that. And I did it just this past weekend. I was talking in Kansas City, giving a talk, and was my focal point. I try to tell the men, try as a human being in Christ's mind to get to that point. How did he get to the point that he put himself on that cross for you? Can you do the same? Can you answer that question on a daily basis? Can you put that mindset that he had on everything that you do? That's your calling, to die to yourself every single day in every aspect of every walk of your life. To be a true disciple of Christ, you have to have that mindset. And I try to convey that message. The cross is the answer. Any question that you have, it is. I'm convinced, beyond a doubt, it is there and only there.
All right, we're going to pause there and then come back to it because that's so important. Thanks you, Elvis. Let's take a break. And before we do take the break, very quickly, I just want to remind you that stories like Elvis's are on the Coming Home Network website for you to be encouraged and for you to share with others who need the same encouragement of a story of the work of God's life. That's chnetwork.org. Please check us out, and then I'll see you after the break. Welcome back to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host, and our guest is Elvis Grbac. And what a great pleasure. Boy, so much I'd love to talk to you about. Let's go for a little bit more on what we were talking about, because a number of things. I want to talk about the Eucharist. I want to talk about NFL, right. And then also about what you're doing now. I want to make sure we get to all that. But two things, though. The cross. I mean, we ended on that. We don't want to stop there, because when I look at, for example, Galatians, St. Paul's, the cross was so absolutely central to everything for him, if you will, in his conversion. I mean, it took a long time for him to even understand his conversion. He had to get away from people for a number of years.
Right, 3 years. To
reflect on the meaning. And when he comes out of that, basically his thing was, it's the cross. Because he says, for I through the law died to the law, that I might live to God, for I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. In the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. You know, it's that the crucifix. Or in the end, he ends it by saying, let no man trouble me. In other words, guys, just back off, because I bear on my body the marks of Jesus.
Right.
I mean, he is the living crucifix, if you will. I mean, there's Paul.
Right. Well, going back to the Eucharist, okay? Pray, brothers and sisters, that my sacrifice and yours may be acceptable. So trying to convey that message to those men that I'm speaking to, that it is your sacrifice, within giving that sacrifice in unity with the Son through the Spirit to the Father in the Eucharist, and being a part of that. I also talk about this too, is Christ giving Christ to Christ. How does that play out in the Eucharist? So when we walk up and to receive the body and blood of Christ, it is no longer I who live, but Christ living within me. I'm offering myself completely, all my failings, all whatever has happened in my life, suffering. Yeah. I'm offering that to Christ, who I am actually receiving, and he is offering himself to me. There's a union there that is beyond that we can even comprehend. But in his divine plan, that was his plan, to be able to leave us his body and blood so that we could be unified in that, so that eventually the heavenly banquet that we can be a part of. I mean, what an unbelievable opportunity that we have on a daily basis to share his body and blood, soul, and divinity that continues on our journey. The church says it is the source and summit of our life. That when you come up there with the right disposition to really understand, okay, and Paul even says, be very, very mindful when you walk up that aisle with the right mindset and what you're receiving. Receive it correctly as the body and blood of Christ.
Our Lord in John 6 makes that statement, unless you eat my body and drink my blood, you have no life within you.
No life.
No life. And if you just take that phrase, unless you eat my body, that just describes a huge journey of intellect and of self-surrender to not just walk up forward. A lot of people walk up forward and they're oblivious.
Right.
But to truly understand and receive that, so the eating of it is a truly surrender and experience of the eternal. I mean, it
comes to a point in your life that there's a true trust in God's providence in your life. To be able to hand yourself over to Christ and to trust him in all that you do, surrendering yourself in your own ego to say, God, here I am. You have created me in your image. I offer myself up to you. Whatever failings those are, it doesn't matter, because he has created you. There is a process there, like you said, that you have to answer that question. Yeah. You have to come to that question and say, do I truly believe that's the body and blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord? And when you come to it and you realize that, it will change your life like it did for me completely.
course, that's the way it is with the NFL. I mean, a total surrender of self for the good of the team, no matter what it takes. You know, I remember sometimes I'd be, watching a local, just kids playing soccer or whatever you're playing, and you can get so motivated for the good of the team. You're literally willing almost to do anything for this team. You could hurt yourself for the rest of your life. I'm surrendered the whole life for this moment, for this team. And you step back and say, wait a second.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about the NFL, if you would. I mean, in a way we can on TV.
Let me just say this, and I say it to every men's group. I'm not here to say that, what I did for a living, that I would go back and change everything. No, I'm not saying that. My son asked me that question when I started giving talks. I said, I'm not going to do that because those young kids that come to hear me talk, they want to experience that. It's one of the greatest things you can do, that you can accomplish. You should absolutely go ahead and do that. However, my message is make sure Christ is a part of that. If it isn't, it's going to be an unbelievable struggle. And what people saw that I did for a living, and many of those guys that are in the league now, is an unbelievable effort on their own part. Imagine that. It is their own individual effort. Imagine that talent that they have. But then there's other guys that are in that league that do recognize that they have a God-given talent, and they start with the living Lord. And through all the ups and downs of the season or the career, they have a very even keel through it. I didn't have that even keel. I had a very roller coaster ride to it. I would just hope that my message that I can bring to the younger generation is to whatever you do, if you're a musician or if you're a scientist or whatever it is that you have a passion for, make sure that Christ is a part of it. He will sustain you through anything that you go through. And everybody will have struggles through all those. But as a professional athlete, as a baseball, football, basketball, whatever, go and do it. Live out your dreams. I did. I had an unbelievable opportunity to do it. Absolutely, you should. Absolutely.
We live in a culture today where many of us wonder if this is the last culture the world will ever experience, because it just seems to be going down.
It's not over.
I know. But a lot of people think, they look at what's the craziness of just so many cats have been let out of so many bags. But the point I'm making is that a lot of the ideas that have become just commonplace today came from philosophers 300-400 years ago.
Sure.
And these were brilliant men given great skills, and they could have changed the world, but they changed it in a wrong direction.
For themselves.
We've been given gifts, and if we don't have the gratitude to understand that, we can misuse those gifts.
Yes.
And to him is given much, much is required.
Right. On that point, there's many parents sitting out there right now listening to me and having 3 kids of my own. I guarantee you they've got this question. Dad, I don't think that's the body and blood of Christ anymore. They've heard, I guarantee there's a million out there. I heard that, okay? So I was taking my oldest son, Jack, to confession. He was coming home from college, and it was at Christmas time. And he said that to me on the way to confession. And it was like a dagger, just thrown into my heart. And the first thing that came to my mind was John 6. I was going to open up scripture and go right to it, said, hey, it's right here. You have no life within you. None, if you do not believe. A good friend of mine, Father Jim Cosgrove, who's up in the Cleveland area, newly ordained. He's been ordained for about 2 years now, 2-3 years. He said, close it. I said, really? He said, the way your son will see you, the way you receive the Eucharist, and the way you live your life, like my parents did, and the words that come out of your mouth on certain situations that you're going to be in, through your suffering, through your challenges, he will look at you and he will say, does Christ truly live in him? If he truly believes that, and he goes to Mass every day, or he goes to church on Sunday when he can, or when he does, okay, does he live as Christ lives within him? And as I know, kids will perceive, they won't listen to your words pretty much, but they have a good sense of what you're doing in your life. And so I really took that to heart. And so what I try to do is I try to combine both. I try to live a life conformed to Christ, but also try to bring the message also.
Yeah, Paul says that somewhere. I remember once speaking to a dinner of deacons, and I knew that I was unworthy to talk to this group of fine men. Who am I to give them advice? I mean, but, what's the job of a deacon? And that's what I was to speak on. Well, but I said, okay, I'll just simply say, it's what Paul says here when he told his people, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And when he said that, he is not lifting himself up. He's basically saying, okay, guys, I know I've got to show you how to do it.
Right.
And that's what you're saying about fathers to sons.
Yeah, absolutely. All your kids. I'll give you a great example because I can see the fruit of that labor because my daughter, being the youngest, she's the one in college that wakes up before she has to go to practice at 6 o'clock in the morning, and she's opening scripture and reading. She starts her day with could be a half an hour to 45 minutes in scripture on her own, and then goes on her day. So I see the fruit of my labor, and I see that even in my relationship with my wife. I encourage men of faith to be able to live as Christ and to really speak his word.
I mentioned earlier about whether you'd lived the sacraments during all those years. Did your reawakening after the dark years helped you appreciate the sacrament of marriage?
Oh yes, absolutely. A covenantal bond, that you are truly the two up on the altar are the true instruments of the covenantal bond with God. That is to go all the way back 25 years of my, dating my wife in high school, to truly realize a covenantal bond with God that was made. And through all those years and through all those struggles and through continuing to raise our children, there is nothing that can separate us. There isn't. As long as that bond, that love of God being within that marriage and covenantal bond, there's nothing that's going to separate that.
All right, so you're retired. You set that ring aside, right? That ring's sitting up there, and all of that.
Collecting dust.
So, what are you doing in not only your retirement, but your reawakened years of faith?
Well, it's interesting. So, discerning for the diaconate program in the Diocese of Cleveland. I have to put that on hold a little bit. So I was talking about my daughter. She's very proud of her. She's a great athlete at Northwestern. Went to the Diocese of Cleveland, and my wife and I both went there and told them our situation and what I was discerning. Great advice from Deacon Kushner, who's the head of the department there, and said, now is not the time. Why don't you come to the seminary and get your master's? So I'm in the process of getting my master's in theology.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I'm doing that now. I continue to be part of the Catholic Speakers Organization. I go around the country and I give talks to men's conferences. I've been doing a ton of those. Guys want to hear my story. They want to hear the story of being a professional athlete at the highest level. But how do you integrate that with your work life, your family life, and your faith life? I have an unbelievable opportunity right now coming up back at my alma mater in the Cleveland area, Villa Angela St. Joseph. I have an opportunity to go back there. The Marianist brothers, who are based in St. Louis, are still part of our school. They run something called the MUSP program. It's the Marianist Urban Student Program, where we, within the Diocese of Cleveland, 6 individuals are brought into our co-ed high school, and I would be the director of that program. And so I would have oversee 24 children within high school to guide them spiritually, mentally, physically through the entire process, and then to get them beyond the high school level into the college level or wherever they want to go, whatever vocational call they have at that time. But I also want to be so integrated into school. My vocational call is my marriage, but there's something even beyond that. And I'm really looking forward to being a part of that process over at VASJ. But they're also asking me to come on and also be the head football coach and possibly the AD there. So I
That's neat.
really want to be integrated into the school that those children will come to know me so deeply and my faith, and to be able to guide them along that path, along a journey that, like I did, very typical, high school. What type of relationship do you have with Christ going into college that'll get you through those years that you're away from your parents and you have to start making decisions that you have to do, and then beyond that. So I'm being very called right now to be able to do that.
There's I think it's an NCAA commercial on TV that we see a lot that talks about the majority of college athletes are not going to spend their life in the professional ranks. I think about in your own neck of the woods in Cleveland, there's a couple guys that who made it big. LeBron James, I don't even know if he finished high school. I mean, I'm not even sure, but he went right on. There he is, looking today. Or the young man who played for Ohio State quarterback a couple years ago. He just played at the end and it took all the way to the. Remember, I can't think of his name right now, but he was like
I don't
second.
know too many Ohio State players.
Oh, I know, that's right. You're from the state up north, but he grew up poor in Cleveland, but he made it. He's made it all the way. So how do you help young men that they see this as how they're going to have their future, but not very many are able to make it all the way? How do you help them balance that with their calling?
They have to start with their faith life first. That you can put that aside, because that will be put aside, like it was put aside for me. Somewhere down the line, it will come to an end. But eternal life is eternal life.
Yeah.
So that's the foundation. Where is your faith life in all this? Because family, I'm very blessed to have what I have. They may not have that. However, their faith life can ride that through that, okay? Now, there's going to be those ups and downs in that professional life or that college life, okay? You might get injured and never play again. So what do you do then? What I want to be able to do is to integrate that, that love of Christ in their life that goes beyond what is man-made. And that's what I'd say, is that what I did for a living is a man-made conception of a bunch of men getting together to take a ball and crossing a white line, and it's called 7 points. That's what it really comes down to.
Yeah.
But here is something divine, eternal, that we should all be striving for, because we're created in the image and likeness of God. If I can incorporate the love of Christ and the relationship into those young individuals, I've done my job. I've done my job.
Another part of it is, you talked about that ring. It isn't just the success and the power and the prestige. A very, very essential, though often forgot part of the gospel is simplicity and detachment. And it ain't about money. It ain't about material things. How do we help young people see that that's not the goal?
Humility. I will give you a great example. Okay, let me just go back to my first high school football coach, Bill Grbac at VASJ. The school started in the early 50s. He was the head football coach from the conception to, I think, into the 2000s. So he had been there for a long time.
Wow.
One of the greatest football coaches in the state of Ohio of all time, the most humble man. And I have an opportunity to go back there and to be part of his program that he founded. So that's my foundation. So when I got into athletic sports, he was the first one that really taught me how to handle success in a very humble way.
Yeah.
Did I always do that? No, I failed. Okay. But I realized through the process that you can be successful and handle all those situations and still be humble and do those.
Yeah. I mean, let's face it, when we do a job, obviously making money is important because our responsibility is to support the family.
Right.
But as soon as any occupation becomes about the money, whether it's teaching or medicine or farming, football, when it's about the money, it starts to go downhill immediately.
Well, put myself in this situation, what I'm going through right now, being a part of the MUST program and the head football coach. Okay, so I went through a whole discernment process of saying, where is God calling me in this? Or is this my own ego? Or is this the outside factor of the alumni saying, oh, you have to be here. You've got to do this. This is great for our school. Or is it the devil himself, the greed, the power, the money? You've got to listen to what God is calling you to, what's your true vocation.
And it sounds like for you, which you got blessed also to have a spiritual director.
I do.
How important was that in your journey?
Extremely important, because at that time, I had a lot of questions. And going through the seminary and being a part of that. And for me, going to the seminary and studying, it's my prayer. It fulfills me completely. But you still have questions. And to be able to have him in my life, to be a part of that, to really understand my whole process, and then to see where I'm at, it's unbelievable.
Got an email, Gary from Arizona. He writes, I'm a convert to the Catholic Church and am passionate and committed to my faith. I've had an incredibly difficult time, though, connecting with other men in my parish and diocese who share my love for the Church and Jesus Christ. Why does the Catholic Church not have the same support for men I had in my previous evangelical denomination? Bible studies, men's groups, etc. were all a part of my background, and I miss them.
Start it yourself. What are you waiting for? Yes, I will agree with him on some of those points. That, let's just say this. I heard Scott Hahn give a talk a couple years ago here in Columbus. He said, if you took a family of 5, husband and wife and 3 kids, if the child was active in their faith, it would be about 10% of the rest of the family would be active in their faith. Typically, the mother is active in her faith, goes up to about 25%. If the men are active in that family and their faith, 75% and up, the rest of the family. It is up to us, okay? Take the time to cultivate that within your own parish. Be the first one to lead that. Go to your pastor and voice your opinion, and be the one to say, you know what, I would like to start something. If you have a true love of Christ, then that's what he might be calling you to do, to go out there and do that. You start it and watch the fruits of your labor after that.
I was watching a movie last night, The Natural.
So was I.
Okay. Well, there's a scene in that. How can we say it on TV? But there's a scene in that where the scout sends the player to this struggling team, right? And the coach will not play him. So for the longest time, he sits on the bench, and that coach had no idea what he had sitting on the bench. I wonder if there are priests out there that have no idea what they got sitting in their pews.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? There are men ready to be empowered and encouraged.
Open up your mouth. Be active. Be like me. Give my example is a great example of what I did when I was younger, what I did as a professional career. Go and be active in the church. By God's grace, he will lead you where you have to go. And then bring other men along with you. But it takes that courage to the cross. It takes that courage all the way to the cross to die for yourself and to be able to lead something. And then watch the disciples that will follow after that. If you don't have something in your parish, okay, I think it's time to really to voice your opinion and talk to the pastor, and then start something. I think it's up to those men.
And we're living at a time when resources are so available.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree. There's too much out there for us not to sit there and go, well, I didn't have something to use or do. It's there. You just have to open up your mouth and to be that leader in your parish.
All right. Elvis, what a great privilege to have
Thank
you
you.
on the program.
Thank
you. Our prayers are with you as you contemplate this new mission.
Yes.
What an exciting thing, which again, coming full circle, using your gifts, again, that God had given you way back when, all the years, now you can share those with others in the new position, and then even discerning diaconate. Praise God.
Pray for me.
All right. And thank you. Thank you for joining us on this program. And thank you also for joining us I hope that Elvis's story is an encouragement to you. Once again, encourage you to go to chnetwork.org, where you can hear more about Elvis's work, as well as all the other conversion stories we post there. God bless you. Look forward to seeing you again next week.